Hello, everyone. So far, lots of exciting sessions going on. My name is Javeria Masood. I am a global shipper from the Islamabad hub of Pakistan. I'm an architect and an urban designer, work at the confluence of human behavior and the design of natural and built spaces. So very interested in bringing design thinking and the humane aspect into design and cities. I'm very happy to introduce for this session John Lin. He studied art and medicine and people before he delved into architecture. He's currently the associate professor at the University of Hong Kong and is a director of a design and research platform called the Rural-Urban Framework. So their approach is to combine research into large-scale urbanization processes and integration of local construction practices, keeping the contemporary technology also handy. They won some brilliant awards, such as the Curry Award, which is for design, and the Riba Emerging Architect Award. Just yesterday, there was a news at the CNN, which I think, I hope some of you read, or if you haven't, you should go through it. So John Lin, could you come on? Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Javeria. Okay, so I'd like to start today by thinking about the relationship between the rural and the urban. So I've heard that you're all geniuses here, so I've tried to make this very simple. I've devised a very simple test. The image on the left or the right is rural and urban. But really, it's about the concept of what is rural, what is urban. For some of you, maybe it means that Starbucks is over 15 minutes away. For me, then you know you're in the rural. But the fact is that it's the same image. And the rural and the urban have collided in the age of rapid urbanization. And that's what I want to discuss today. We have collisions between infrastructure and agriculture, infrastructure in the landscape, and a collision between traditional forms of living and modern housing. So the question is, how do we engage these collisions, these contradictions through design? Today, I'm going to talk you through 5 paradoxes that occur through the process of rapid urbanization. And these paradoxes occur because, well, at the global level, we all understand the forces of urbanization. But when they meet local conditions, when they meet specific cultural and societal conditions, then very diverse things happen. And the question will be how we engage that through design. So just a background information. Over the last 10 years, Joshua Bookover and myself at the University of Hong Kong, we've been operating a nonprofit research and design laboratory. We research into the processes of urbanization, and we think about how to engage that, and we test it out. We develop prototypes for for altering that process and for engaging this process. So it's a Robin Hood act, to be very honest. We leverage different forms of funding, academic funding. We leverage donations, government funding. We work with communities. And what's interesting about it is that when you're not sure who is paying you, then it creates a very collaborative model for working. The first paradox I want to talk about is very simple. When we build these massive infrastructures to not only connect new urban centers, but to encourage development in new rural areas, what about the massive disruptions and disconnections that it creates at the ground level? This occurred to us in one of our school projects, the Mulan School in Guangdong province, where the high-speed railway had to be built through the site of the school, a massive cut in the earth. So what we did was we took the funding from the retaining wall, from the development of the railway infrastructure, and we added to it. We added a public space, we added an ecological toilet and rebed. Today, the high-speed railway runs right behind a new infrastructure, an ecological and social infrastructure. So we think it's possible to combine different forms of infrastructure. Now, as migrants go to the cities in search of work, often what they end up doing is to help build the very cities. So the money they send back, however, is usually invested in a house. They don't trust banks. They invest it in the house. It could take 10, 20, 30 years to build. You know this. The paradox here is that as more and more people leave to go to the cities, the population declines. It gets more empty. But the building density actually rises. So the village is getting denser and denser even as people leave the village. In our very first project, we had to consider what to do with a new primary school. And we thought, how could the school engage the community? And what could the school, as a building, give back to the community? So this is the design. It's built into the rice terraces. And today, it's the sole public space for when this community of migrants comes back for important weddings or yearly events. It's the only public space in which they can all gather. Underneath the steps creates a covered walkway for the students, and the front of the building faces the terraced rice farming landscape beyond. So the school is really a bridge between the agricultural economy and the new migrant economy. As people leave, it also creates a new social transformation back in the village. Not only are the elderly and the children remaining, but we've heard cases where one brother will stay home and take care of his other 5 brothers' children. So it creates new family structures. On the other hand, there is also a dramatic transformation in the style of house building. A kind of generic system that is known all over the world for its simplicity and because you don't need any expertise really to build it. This has created the Everywhere Village. So as these deep social transformations are taking place on the inside, exteriorly, the rural and the urban have become more and more similar. They have become indistinct in the age of urbanization. It's really hard in some places to tell what is rural and what is urban. In a project in Hunan province, our Hong Kong partner, a charity, the Institute for Integrated Rural Development, asked us to develop a new healthcare building. This is their existing healthcare building. So if you got sick, well, you needed to at least know 2 or 3 very healthy relatives to help carry you up the 3 flights of stairs for treatment. This is the land that they bought. What we found was that we had to engage the issue of accessibility. That was urgent. But the cost for putting in an elevator was the same cost as putting in a ramp. And we developed a ramp, which also became a kind of community space. So we took financial value and we tried to add on social value. Now, old people from across the street in this old person's home now come here and use it for exercise. This was something that was unanticipated. Children come here to play. They run through the ramp. And not only is this healthcare building a place for the sick, the building has also become the focus of the community. It has also become a place in which health has been promoted. This process is only speeding up. A year ago in Guangdong province, a village looked like this village in Changlu. 6 months later, it looks like this. And today, it has a density that is greater than in most cities. So how does this happen? It's because it occurs at the level of the design. At the level of design, the entire village must get together and agree on the same layout and design for the housing. So everybody simply wants the biggest house on the biggest piece of land. So the paradox is that the village, which is formed traditionally from collective interest, is the place now where the common good has been given away to individual interest. In this case study is Sichuan province, and we had an opportunity to design a village from scratch, a new prototype for the modern village. The story of this village, it's called Jintae Village, is that after the great 2008 Sichuan earthquake, the villagers had already rebuilt their houses. And a year and a half later, before many of them even moved in, aftershocks and rainfall and landslides knocked down all the new houses. So this was already the third time in which they had rebuilt their houses. We got in touch with our partner, Nan Feng, a developer in Hong Kong, and we discussed how we could, if we had to rebuild the village a third time, could we not do it better? Do we not have the responsibility to try to create a new prototype for this? So the funding for the basic house is there, and the villagers give some funding comes from the government, some from the villagers themselves. And Nan Feng provided funding to essentially upgrade the village to become a more ecological village. So they've paid for a reed water system. There's a gray water recycling system in the houses. And in our design, it's really about preserving the idea of the common good. On the ground level, spaces are opened up for a new microeconomy to happen. Spaces for workshops. Villagers have developed businesses as tourism begins to actually pass through this village. So more and more people are passing by. And on the rooftops is a space given for individual household farming. Ironically, even though it's a community of farmers, they have very little land for their own individual farming. So we're also working with a local Chinese charity to help them develop crops, develop ways of farming, which is going to strengthen their economic viability. So far, we have been looking at what happens when the urban invades the rural. So I'd like to pause and look at what happens when the rural invades the urban. And for this, we're going to move about 1,000 kilometers north to Ulaanbaatar, where much of the population is still living as traditional nomadic herding society. And this, the Mongolian nomadic tent, or ger, has facilitated this. Now, in recent years, because of very cold winters and a government policy to allow every Mongolian to claim 700 square meters of land, they moved the ger to come to the city, and the rule is that you have to build a fence around it so that we can keep track of your land now that you have it. Now, you have to understand that land is collectively owned in the kind of nomadic concept. So this is very new. Over time, it has created this, the city of nomads, where over half of the urban population, over 600,000 people, live in the ger district. This district may look like a suburbs, but it has no clear infrastructure. So life in the ger districts is not easy. You have to collect water from local kiosks. And garbage is an idea that is completely alien to a nomadic lifestyle. They simply don't know what to do with it. It's an invention of urbanization. Our first task, working with our partners, Asia Society, was to develop a garbage recycling and collection center. It took some time to discuss so that the garbage was not thrown directly on the ramp. So there's a lot of education involved. But in the future, this will be the foundation for a new community center. The garbage recycling center will evolve into a kiosk, into community showers, playgrounds. Because in Mongolian, according to our Mongolian partner Badran, there is no equivalent word for community. They have no such experience with living as large communities. So from the very, very root, we have to develop the very concept of community. In another project with Ger Hub, we started to look at life within the traditional Mongolian Ger, which finds itself in very foreign circumstances, enclosed within a fence, and essentially settled. So our solution was the Ger plugin, in which a toilet and shower, modern and heating, can be plugged into the traditional Ger. The idea is to help and to continuously to evolve a 1,000-year-old structure that has been built for nomadic living, and to evolve it in order to preserve this very important cultural and societal artifact or way of life, to essentially evolve a traditional way of life to a modern way of life. So where is the rural in an urban world? I know that you came to hear about the Humane City, and I'm sorry if it was a bit of a trick, but I think the idea is that we have to think about the urbanization process, and we have to start at its root, where it begins. And we have to start thinking about shaping that urbanization process. If we want to make our cities better, then we have to think about the process, and we have to begin at the heart of the rural, so that we can capture some of the vitality, some of the innovation, some of the aspects of community, and the ecological sustainability of traditional rural societies. A new framework for the relationship between rural and urban. Thank you.
Thank you for the presentation. It's very inspiring to see how you've been able to mitigate between different paradoxes. And just looking at the presentation, some of these paradoxes I think are not just local, but are very global in nature. I can definitely see their presence in Pakistan. So I guess I'm curious to know what were some of the challenges that you faced to get a buy-in from all the stakeholders, government, donors, and then the community itself to be able to learn the new ways that you were teaching and also to take ownership?
I mean, I think that buy-in is an interesting term. I personally don't really understand what it means, but I think that everybody has their own agenda. So I think the government has their agenda, the villagers have their agenda, the village leader has an agenda, we also have an agenda. And the projects take time. It's about setting up a platform for which these agendas can be aired and trying to discover a means of connecting them all. I think that's the ultimate buy-in, where the architecture, funny enough, I think it's also very important to build. Because the architecture becomes a manifestation of that collaborative process. It becomes a manifesto of the idea that all these agendas can actually meet. Architecture was always planned this way, in which you would build a house, and then we would build it together. We would come and build my house, so the entire community would gather together. And at the end, what is built is a testimony to that collaborative effort. So, communication. We actually make a lot of models. I think that we try to make things as clear as possible. We bring entire models of these, the houses that we propose, the projects that we propose, not just renderings, and fancy images. And we work with them. And the villagers are involved, the government's involved, and we actually begin to alter them. We bring a team of students. So we are actually engaging on some common ground, which is literally what are we going to build together.
Yes, I think that is why it then becomes more of like a bottom-up approach as opposed to top-down, because you're co-creating. In a lot of cases, the development sector and the private stakeholders are more interested in just going into a community and then building a housing. And there's very little involvement of people who are actually going to use that space.
Well, it's an interesting question because one of the examples I showed was what could only happen because it's a purely bottom-up process.
Right.
So I think it's really about engaging the relationship between the top-down and bottom-up process, and finding a balance there. You need leadership. I think leadership is very, very important. That's really what has to happen. So when you have conversation, you also need a leader in that conversation. That's the role that we find ourselves in.
So maybe help us also understand, what is a humane city then, in your view?
Well, that's a good question. I think that a humane city essentially captures the qualities of life as we know that evolved through villages. A humane city has a sense of community, has a sense of belonging. A humane city is innovative, it's like diverse. We talked about earlier in your session the problem of homelessness. And it's an interesting thing because it's the city which creates individuals. You don't find homeless people in the village because here you have communities and you allow for communities. This is a very important aspect, I think. So I think the city, as it grows, must also scale itself down or allow these scales of communities to occur.
Right. Well, at this point, I'd also like to ask if the audience has any questions. Well, then I have tons of questions,
Wow.
I think.
It was really clear. Or you're really geniuses.
Okay. Well, there was this one project that you were mentioning, and you talked about how you, changed the financial value into the social value. So then perhaps maybe highlight a little more on what the investment here is.
Yeah, I'm very interested in the idea of value, especially now. I mean, I think that our concept of value is always changing. Even money, I think, if we go from a bartering system, which is kind of interesting, we exchange a pig for a cow or 4 chickens, we both gain value. You could argue that money, I'm really getting dangerous territory here. But I think that it's possible to create value through form and to transfer value from financial to social value. You had a question.
Thank you. It was a very interesting presentation, and I'm from Mongolia. And what is your take on leapfrogging into a completely new 21st century utopia type smart cities, from being a nomadic citizen, leapfrogging the development stages of the Western cities, or the cities as we know them, combining the best of the design, making the houses from energy efficient materials, making houses smart, connecting with internet, and making them affordable, reusing and recycling all the waste, etc. Because this is one of the projects that we're working on with a company called Utopia, Jonathan Hirsch.
So I didn't catch the first word.
What is your take on leapfrogging?
Oh, leapfrogging. I see. I'm not sure what it is as a term. I remember what you do in the playground, but I mean, I think everything you were talking about is absolutely important, and maybe you could you can present.
Well, we are now starting a project where we will take the nomads, and instead of making them go through the full cycle of what the Western cities have undergone maybe over the centuries, we try to design a new small pilot type of a city in Ulaanbaatar where with the city is we are naming Smart City.
Sure.
So instead of building, you are talking about building, changing a little bit, making addition to the gears, making these trash collection centers into community centers, etc. Instead, we are trying to just leapfrog into the 21st century new type of design city.
Yeah, I mean, that sounds fantastic. I mean, I think it's the idea that maybe cities are evolving, and we have to take the lessons from the past, but we have to find a way where we're preserving the unique qualities of the cities. You know, you don't go to Paris to go to the same mall that you go when you go to Hong Kong. You know, you go because there's things about qualities about every city that are unique. And I think this is one of the major issues and one of the incredible resources and the richness of Ulaanbaatar, because of the culture is so unique. And to begin to think about our development, you know, model in a completely new way, in a very, very specific way. So smart city, again, is another large generalizing term. And I think every city can become more intelligent in its own way. But you're also bringing up a very important issue, which is the ability to think about urban planning and city building or even development as an evolutionary process, not just as a single vision to perfect it, but something that is allowed to transform and grow. So many of our projects also, we don't try to control too much. It's an issue, I think, about control. You know, if you have to accept that there has to be some gray areas. You have to trust people, I think.
I think the other thing that comes to my mind is also what you meant by leapfrogging, and also like a lot of people, there's this huge ratio of urbanization, a lot of people moving to cities because the rural areas are not providing them with the basic necessities or with like a convenient, easy lifestyle. So building and vitalizing the rural spaces and ensure that it's not just a unicentral approach of building cities more and more, but also like taking that progression into other parts as well. So if the rural areas are developed, then people wouldn't feel that much of a need to move to cities. Hence, that's going to create perhaps a balance in the urbanization concerns. Does anybody else in the audience have any questions? Okay. Sorry.
Okay.
How are we going to finance, and who is going to invest into the transition from, you know, current to a state where you've shown the social inclusion and the impact we're trying to achieve also from an environmental and social point of view? So how is that going to come together from a investment and financing point of view?
I don't know what that word means, finance. Can you? No, yeah, of course, that's a very good question. I mean, what I think is kind of interesting is that if you think about all the buildings that are built in the rural areas in China, I bet you that is going to be nearly equivalent to what is being built in the cities. And it's built by just small remittances. So I think that there are many forms of it, you know, and I think you're alluding to essentially top-down finance. I think that's very important. But I think it's simply a matter of not immediately thinking that financial currency is not equivalent or can't coincide with social and cultural ones, you know, because I think what's happening now, I think, is that we're going for solutions that are prepackaged, that are global. We see they work in different places, and so I'm not sitting here offering an answer to things on this scale, but I'm more advocating that there are more interesting ground-up conditions that might do with finance. I mean, we have worked hard to make this GER plugin affordable. It eventually will be a product. We're not going to develop it further, but the investment from that comes with a company that is working with us. You know, and this is a unique need. I mean, you don't need this in New York, but there are 600,000 people living there who might very well need that or think that's a very interesting, you know, element. And it takes this kind of study. It takes a sensitivity to that.
Well, I'm sure that there are a lot of
Oh,
questions.
there's another
still.
question, right? Did you
We're actually out of
okay.
time, but okay, we'll take one more question.
Sorry.
Sorry.
I saw this big red timeout.
Yes, I did.
Thank you. In a number of cities, you know, the urban and the rural have already clashed, if you like. I mean, you come from Hong Kong, and Hong Kong is an environment where 40% of the population live in government-built affordable housing. I just wondered if you had any views about how to make existing stock like that more humane. Obviously, one can look at new projects and make new projects more humane, but for the existing building stock that a lot of cities have, do you have solutions there as well?
Well, I'm low on solutions today, but I think the good news is that in every city that I've been to, there are really interesting things happening. There are really interesting solutions. And I think often it means that they just need to be scaled up. And we have to think about how to scale it up. But there are there's incredible innovation out there. You know, so in Hong Kong, you make a statement about it. I agree with you. Most of the city has that problem. But not all of it. You know, there are really moments and places in the city when housing is working or there's a community that is working. I think this is true of every city. So I'm sorry not to, you know, I'm just a reluctant architect. But I think it's really starting to think about our cities in very unique ways. And I think those solutions are there. I mean, Javeria is working on them in Islamabad. So.
I think I think city is a space that we all experience. So we can't say that it's not an area or it's not our field, but it's actually a space that we all interact in. It's in the environment that we live in really shapes us. So it's very important to be mindful of all the social and cultural starters and all the financial starters, and then try to create a city that's more humane, approachable, and has like a very good sense of community. I'm truly inspired by your work. Thank you so much for sharing the presentation. Thank you.